right. Welcome back to the Know Your Numbers REI podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormack. And today we'll be talking about a controversial subject, one that we often see for people who are asked about their approach to taxes, whether they feel like they're overpaying too much in taxes. The common response we get is what we'll be covering today. Now, before we get into the details, the fun of this episode, I would just like to remind you guys that if you get any sort of value out of this, please do us a favor, leave us a 5-star rating and review, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're on Apple, you can even go a step further and give us a written review. This helps us get in the ears of those who want to hear something like this, people who are interested in real estate tax strategies or just tax and business strategies in general. And if you know somebody who's struggling with their approach to taxes, maybe they feel like they're overpaying too much in taxes, maybe this episode will ring true to them, or maybe it rings true to you. Go ahead and fill out our forms, find some time on the calendar to meet with our team to see if our services are a good fit for you. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. We are really pushing ourselves out on the YouTube. We have expanded our team and added some great team members who are helping us in that division. So be sure to keep up to date with all of our YouTube productions. It's really an honor and privilege to be out there. So with all that in mind, here we are today. Again, this is a controversial subject, which really deals with the idea of taxes, specifically overpaying on taxes. And the question or the topic can really be summed up in, does it make you a good citizen to overpay your taxes? And the reason this topic might come up, some of you might be like, who the heck would want to overpay on taxes? The truth of the matter is most people overpay on taxes. Everybody who gets a refund at year end has overpaid on taxes throughout the year. And that's just what we know about. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, came out in 2017 and they estimated that $1 billion is spent by the American people in tax overpayments every year. This is just based on mistakes on your tax return, not necessarily missed opportunities from a lack of planning. This is just on preparing your taxes. They're realizing that billion with a B is being overpaid to the US government, which begs the question, does it make you a good citizen to overpay on taxes? Another reason we're talking about this is because I've heard this from people that we've had discussions with. They say, I just consider it my civic duty to pay taxes and I'm okay to give that money up. And don't get me wrong, this is not an excuse to not pay taxes. I believe people should pay their fair share in taxes, but I don't think they should pay anything more than that. And I would argue that fair share should be a lot less than what the US government makes it out to be. So really, I'm going to cover 3 topics, 3 reasons that it does not make you a good citizen to overpay on your taxes. And again, this might be controversial. If you disagree with a lot of things, I'd love to hear some feedback. This can be a conversation that we continue on, maybe even have people on to discuss the topic of taxes, civic duty, what it means to be a good citizen, and ultimately try to get an answer and give you guys some greater insight into how we can best approach our taxes, our tax liability, our tax savings to keep more money in our pockets and ultimately better the economy and society, which is really the reason we want to cover this, is because one reason it does not make you a good citizen to overpay on taxes is mainly because overpaying taxes means less money for you to serve others. Now, hear me out. People are like, well, yeah, giving money to the government serves our fellow citizen by allowing them to produce things like streets and government organizations that better the community. And I would argue that money is better in the hands of you, the small business owner, the real estate investor, as well as your fellow small business owner and real estate investor than it is in the hands of the US government. I believe that small businesses are more likely to produce a better product. Even big businesses are more likely to produce a better product that goes further in serving the fellow neighbor than the US government would. And it is purely because, one, we are motivated to do good and to provide value to our fellow citizens, especially if you tie yourself to a moral compass, as a lot of our listeners do and a lot of the people that we hang around do. And I believe that business is one of the best ways to love your neighbor because it forces you to provide a good service, a good product in return for something of value. And I think when you don't have that money because you gave it up to the US government, you are in turn costing your fellow citizen what you could have done with that dollar elsewhere, right? So if I have $5,000 and I have the option to either give it to the US government because I just want to overpay on taxes and I consider it my good civic duty to overpay on taxes. Again, this isn't to pay what is rightfully owed. pay Caesar what is owed to Caesar, but give to God what is God's. This is simply, I think the US government should have more of my money than they're actually taking from me. So if I have $5,000 and the option is to give it to the US government willfully, not because I owe it, but willfully because I think it makes me a good citizen, or give it to another business that is going to use that to produce greater value to the US citizen, or to a charity that is going to take that $5,000 and provide a good product, a good service to people in need or people that they're serving. For example, something like Compassion International. We had Ted Benna, the creator of the 401k, on our podcast last year. He talked highly of something like Compassion International that helps the people, the poor and needy out there in the world. I have $5,000. I have the option to give it to the US government or the option to give it to Compassion International. I believe that $5,000 goes a lot further in the pocket of Compassion International. I think it goes to better serve our fellow human more than that $5,000 does to the US government. Because we'll get into some of the areas that the US government is spending money and why that's another reason that we shouldn't give more than our fair share to the US government. But simply from a value standpoint, I believe that something like Compassion International is going to make more use of my money than the US government. The other option is to give it to a small business, get a tax deduction by giving it to another business that is an ordinary and necessary expense for our business. And again, I think a small business, if they're operating to the best of their ability, is going to do a better job at stewarding over that money than the US government, primarily because they are incentivized to do so, right? If I give that $5,000 to a small business, I am holding them responsible. They are expected to give me back more or equal value than I gave them, right? Consider something like accounting services. If you give me $5,000 for a tax plan, I believe that it is my duty, my responsibility to provide you at least $5,000 worth of value, and arguably more than that. And that's usually the case. If you're giving us $5,000, we're going to give you $50,000 worth of savings. Now, if I give the government $5,000, what is their motivation to produce value? Maybe to get reelected or do something to benefit the populace, but more often than not, they're not motivated. A lot of these people that are working in government are so far removed from that dollar that they have no incentive to make sure that it gets put to good use. Whereas if I give it to the small business, those people have a vested interest in the success of their company, and therefore they're going to make sure that they deliver, arguably over-deliver on that $5,000 exchange. Reason number 2, that overpaying on taxes does not make you a good citizen is simply because there is a lack of accountability in most of our governmental offices. Now, this is putting a large umbrella over government offices, and it's not true for every government office, just like the fact that most government workers lack incentives or desire to do good and provide value. I have had some experience with IRS workers, believe it or not, even Department of Revenue workers here in Minnesota, that I believe they provide the greatest value that they're able to. They do probably pursue excellence in a large part of their lives. So while I'm going to say that the government lacks accountability, I don't want it to believe that every government worker lacks accountability. I think we have a duty to appreciate our fellow man as much as possible, but the numbers don't lie, right? And if you're familiar with our economy and the things going on in the United States, you are familiar with the fact that we are close to $34 trillion in debt. And you don't get $34 trillion in debt by having accountability, having responsibility, being accountable to the performance of your organization. Now, if I told you that there was a business out there that was $34 trillion in debt, your first assumption would be, I would never invest in that business. Your second assumption would be the person running that business is probably irresponsible and lacks accountability. And your third assumption would probably be, they're not going to last very long. They're going to go under. Even in our personal lives, if we are even $10,000 in debt, if we are even $20,000 in debt, that doesn't make us feel good. The Bible says that the borrower is slave to the lender. And here we have an organization, the US government, that is $34 trillion in debt. And people out there, people I have conversations with regularly, consider it their civic duty or make themselves a good citizen by overpaying, by giving the government more money than they're required, more money than they deserve, more money than they're asking for, simply because they think it makes them a good citizen. If I were to give a business that were $34 trillion in debt, simply because I thought I was a good person, they don't have any accountability. They're not going to do good with that money. They have a track record of overspending. They have a track record of not making good use of their resources. And that's where we find ourselves as a country. And so overpaying, again, this is not saying that you shouldn't pay taxes. I believe that we should pay taxes. But I believe that you also should have a duty to get your tax burden as low as possible for these reasons, so that you can grow your business, so that you can show greater hospitality to your neighbor, so that you can give more to charity, so that you have more money in your account to take care of your immediate family. I believe that saving on taxes gives you a greater ability to be a better person. I do not believe that overpaying on taxes, giving more than your fair share of taxes, makes you a good person, because the government lacks accountability. They're not going to do good with that money. They've shown a track record of this. They're overspending. They're giving what they don't have for things they don't need, right? And we're very capable of understanding that on a personal level. So reason number 2, that overpaying on taxes does not make you a good citizen, is because the government lacks accountability. $34 trillion in debt. That is not a good thing. And reason number 3, they're spending money in places that don't go along with most people's moral codes, most people's ideas of the good life, of what should be, right? We get $34 trillion in debt because we spend more than $34 trillion, right? And so my question would be, where is the money going? Where does the money that you want to overpay the government, the $5,000 that you willfully give up because it makes you a good citizen to overpay on taxes, where does that go? Does it go to places that are going to serve your fellow man, that are going to better our community? I would say no, it does not. A report came out recently that the federal government has spent nearly $2 billion to fund Planned Parenthood, specifically to fund, I believe, the abortion section of Planned Parenthood. Even though the majority of citizens, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, agree on the fact that the government should not be sending taxpayer dollars to this type of organization. Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, the polls show that Americans agree on the fact that the US government should not fund an organization like Planned Parenthood. And still, the federal government spent nearly $2 billion to an organization that funds the murder, the killing of babies. Not only that, but then earlier this year, you saw that the US government also gave $6 billion to Iran, a country that is known for its advocacy of terrorism. $6 billion of the US dollars, of your taxpayer money, was given to a country that willfully supports terrorism and the murder of innocent people. So that's just $8 billion of the trillions of dollars that the US government spends on a regular basis. And again, if I had business that I knew was spending that type of money in those areas, I would not fund them. I certainly would not overfund them. Because I owe a certain amount in taxes, I am going to pay that certain amount, but I'm going to do whatever I possibly can to decrease that amount. Whatever I possibly can, legally and ethically, to decrease that amount, I will do, because I believe in the 3 reasons. And these are just the 3 beginning reasons why it does not make you a good person to overpay in taxes. The first is because your money is better spent elsewhere. Compassion International, other strong businesses can make better use and have a greater impact on $5,000 than the US government can. They've shown it, partly because they lack accountability, right? That was reason number 2. They lack accountability. They're just putting money everywhere and anywhere that they want without any accountability, without any responsibility, without anybody saying, hey, should we have done that? We're $33 trillion in debt. We're about to be $34 trillion in debt. Maybe we shouldn't be spending all this money in these areas. Maybe we should try to cut back and see how we can. And then reason number 3, it goes in line with the accountability, but they're spending money in places that don't go along with most people's moral codes, most people's ideas of the good life, of what should be, right? They're spending money in areas that are vile and evil. And for that reason, it does not make you a good person to overpay on taxes. This is an emotional episode. It's not always the way that we approach these things, but I do think it is necessary, because we often hear people when they're asked if they think that they overpay on taxes, they give too much to the US government. A lot of people, I think it makes me a good person to overpay the government, or at least pay the government and have no idea whether you're overpaying the government. And so if you have never had a consult to determine if there's anything you can do to pay less to the US government, whether it's for this reason or many others, there's a ton of other reasons that people don't want to pay taxes, partly because a lot of us are strung for cash. I know most people, more than that, is overpaid because people lack planning, and it's simply because I meet with people on a regular basis to look at their tax profile, what they could have done differently. So if that's you, if you are frustrated with the amount that you're giving to the US government, if you believe that money is better put to use in your accounts than it is the US government's, whether for these reasons or else, go ahead and fill out our form and get on our calendar to schedule time for a free consult where we can dive into some of the challenges you faced and see if we're a good fit to work for you. And if you got any sort of value, again, share it with a friend, see what they think. If you know of somebody who's in the real estate space and needs tax savings, help them by just sharing the episode. I thank you for tuning in. I trust you guys are kicking the new year off with a good start, and I look forward to hearing from you all very soon. God bless, and see you next time.